On Tuesday, the 4th of February. I believe everyone's in attendance, that means there's no apologies to give. So item number 2 is apologies for absence, and there are none because everyone's in attendance today. Yep, that's right. Just doing a count. So number 3 is then declarations of interest. Anything to note here, Delith?
Thank you, Leader. It's just to give some advice to members that if you are have any association with Torfaen Leisure Trust, then my advice would be to declare an interest in relation to that particular matter as that is referred to in the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. So item 4, that brings us on to the contract award for leisure services, and over to Fiona and Dave for this one.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, members. As members will know, TLT, Torfaen Leisure Trust, was established as a charitable trust with its own governance in 2013, and there were various benefits to establishing a Torfaen-based trust. A few of those, or a couple of those, is that the Council isn't able to apply for grants that are specifically aimed at the charity sector, and national non-domestic rates, where charities and trusts particularly benefit from a relief at 80%, whereas local authorities do not. We've come here today to discuss the item of who should manage our leisure trust. And as we know, Sports and Leisure has a crucial part to play in delivering our county plan, and it's important to find the right provider to manage these facilities. So in July 2024, Full Council authorised officers to commence a procurement exercise for leisure services in Torfaen. And this is where we're here to discuss as to who would take on that tender, and we have one ahead of us to decide on. TLT, I'd like to note, has been professional and helpful throughout this process, and it is really valued and appreciated. And I think I will pass it over now and add any other thoughts over to Dave for a moment, as I just get my thoughts together.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. So the request of Cabinet today is that we award a contract for leisure services. It's a 10-year contract with the potential to extend for a further 5 years. That would be on a 2-year extension, followed by a potential 2-year extension, followed by a potential 1-year extension. So that's what has been tendered for leisure services, and the request to Cabinet today is that that is awarded to Halo Leisure Services on the basis that they were the successful tenderer through the process. Pleased to say that the standstill period that's referenced in 2.1 has now come to an end without challenge from providers. So the standstill period has now ceased, and the actions that I'm going to talk through in a second can now commence upon Cabinet's decision. The second request is that Cabinet support the admission of Halo to the Greater Gwent Pensions Fund as an admitted body. This is through what's called a pass-through agreement with the Council, providing all of the indemnities that would be required for that agreement into the fund. What that means in practice is that Torfaen Leisure Trust staff who would transfer to the new provider, and again I'll talk through what that means in practice in a moment, would be able to retain their membership of the LGPS. It's an offer that we've put out to Halo that we think they would be willing to accept, subject to Cabinet's view today. There are implications for that underwriting, and I'll cover those when I talk about the risks. As Councillor Cross mentioned, sports and leisure have an increasingly important role to play in delivering those county plan objectives. Increasingly, we're moving beyond leisure just being seen as an activity to do in your leisure time to something that really does have those long-term health and well-being benefits that then have that knock-on impact, positive knock-on impact on a lot of our county plan objectives, particularly around areas like how we support our older residents, how we support children. There's clear leisure outcomes that can contribute to those. We've talked through that the procurement exercise was commenced in July. We've also mentioned, and this is included in Appendix 1, that this is part of a broader commissioning approach that we've taken here. So we've considered through that commissioning cycle all of the different routes that we could use to deliver this service, and the procurement was the conclusion of that commissioning approach. We engaged strongly with the market early through a prior information notice that essentially helped us to structure the procurement in a way that we knew the market would respond positively to. That helps to improve the interest and the strength of their offer that providers put forward. And off the back of that, documentation was pulled into a contract valuing just over £12 million, which is the 10-year annual fee included within that contract. That, importantly, still includes the expectation that that contract decreases annually by the same percentage that was in the previous contract with Torfaen Leisure Trust. The tenders were evaluated partly on price. That relates to profit and profit share, and where that profit share, importantly, would go and how it can be used within Torfaen, but also on social value and, importantly, on quality. And that, again, comes from our engagement, but also the very clear steer from members at Council around the priorities for leisure services going forward. As a result of that, we received 4 tenders. Of those tenders, one stood out in terms of its quality performance being significantly higher than the others. That was Halo, as I've mentioned. They passed all of the pre-qualification information and fell above the quality threshold that's needed to award the contract. And on that basis, that's the recommendation before Cabinet today. What it would mean in practice once that decision is taken is that if it's successful, we would start and coordinate the discussions between TLT as the existing provider and Halo as the new provider around staff transfers under the 2P regulations. The Council's HR department provides support to TLT and would continue to do so through this exercise. We'd also then expand on the contract documentation that's been produced, that was included in the tender pack, to make sure that those standards that we expect to see the provider delivering against are strongly captured in the contractual information that we issue to the new provider. And finally, and I've touched on this already, pensions arrangements would be resolved, if Cabinet approved today, through the pass-through arrangement that we've discussed. The final area then would be around the actual occupation of those facilities and how we secure the appropriate occupation agreements, whether that's licence, lease or other forms of agreement there. There are risks associated with some of this. Those are set out in section 7, particularly in relation to the financial commitment that's been made. This is a 10-year contract. We are expecting the provider to invest on the basis of it being a 10-year contract. And that does, to a degree, provide difficulties in terms of reducing down that contract value significantly during the terms of the contract. But if members were minded to do that, that is possible, but we'd expect to see a lot fewer outcomes delivered and potentially facilities run if that's the negotiation that we entered into with providers. There's also potential risks, as there always would be, of providers failing to deliver the outcomes. As I've touched on, the contractual documentation will be clear to make sure that that's enforceable should the provider fail to do that. There is a risk around service instability during this transitional period, but I do want to echo Councillor Cross's comments around the level of professionalism from the board and the senior management, and in fact all staff across TLT during this period. They've gone to some really strong lengths in terms of improving some of the financial governance and budgeting concerns that had previously been discussed, and that position has improved. The challenge remains one of economies of scale there, but that isn't a reflection on that board or that senior management over the course of this process. A clear transitional plan is now in place to start these discussions moving forward. And so the recommendation is that on that basis, Cabinet award the 10-year contract with the potential to extend and support the admission of Halo into the Greater Gwent Pension Fund as an admitted body via a pass-through agreement with the Council.
Anything to add before we go to questions?
I was only going to add, sorry, I'm getting used to these glasses and looking over them all the time, is that although Halo is a company based in England, it's successfully established, has a successful and established presence in Wales, but crucially it provides economies of scale across their various sites. That was the only additional bit to point out on my part.
Okay, thanks. Right, open up to members for questions. We'll go to Peter first.
Thank you, Chair. You've touched on this already, David, but I'd like to probe a little. How did this tender for Halos excel above others?
Yes, so this was, as I say, a considerably stronger tender than some of the other providers. The way that the tender is assessed is that there's a base level, essentially, that we would assume providers meet, a minimum requirement. For tenderers to be able to excel beyond that, they have to be able to show us added value in the expectations that we have. I can draw you to some of the added value, if you bear with me 2 seconds, that the tenderer made. They made a particularly strong statement around their risk management and business continuity arrangements that gave us reassurance that the minimum requirements there were likely to be exceeded. They also gave very good evidence to demonstrate how they would build a long-term delivery plan that was focused around investment in facilities rather than just the opening of the doors of those facilities, which was a particularly strong answer. They also gave excellent evidence around how they provided programmes that demonstrated an impact on the full range of county plan and Marmot priorities. So they currently run and have committed to running in Torfaen a whole series of support programmes. They've got one called Feel Good for Life, a dementia-friendly programme, digital inclusion projects, carers respite projects, a whole series that they have contractually committed to rolling out within Torfaen through these arrangements. They also showed an exceptional understanding of the target demographics and how their marketing approach would be geared towards increasing usage from those core population groups that we have living within Torfaen. And finally, they gave us reassurance that they were likely to exceed the minimum requirements around their alignment with more than sport activities. So they run programmes called More Than a Gym, More Than a Sports Centre, which is about their presence within the community. So they really gave us that reassurance that they're a community-minded, community-focused provider who would maintain local naming conventions of buildings and of their assets as well. So there were several areas within the tender where we felt they demonstrated evidence above and beyond.
Thank you, that's encouraging. Can I move on to my second question, Chair? I think you've anticipated my second question in that answer, David, but I'm going to ask it in any case. How does the tender and future contract align with the county plan? Please.
Yeah, absolutely, and it does. It aligns very strongly. It won't surprise members, I hope, to know that when we structured the tender and the specification, we placed increasing emphasis and weight on delivery of the county plan objectives. I think it was important to us in this iteration of the leisure contract that it wasn't just a contract to provide money to keep an organisation running. It was a contract that would deliver clear outcomes for the residents of Torfaen as a whole, and that county plan alignment was critical there. So some of the examples I've given there are specific as to how they're going to do it. Just to give you as members the reassurance, that's now tied into the contract that we will issue to the provider. So their key performance indicators will be aligned to delivering against those county plan objectives.
That's very encouraging, thank you.
Thanks. And I guess that feeds in with our wish to move beyond just sort of maintaining day-to-day services, more into how leisure can be a real facilitator of physical activity and wider well-being. The idea that, you know, a leisure services contract isn't just about providing something for sporty people. It's about providing something to help everyone improve their physical activity and well-being.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's the way that the tender is structured and focused around those objectives. That's absolutely right.
Okay, thank you. Sue's got a hand raised. Go to Sue next.
Thank you, Leader. Should it be agreed today, how long do you think it would take to see the new provider in place?
It's a good question. Our expectation, both in the contract and still, is that the new provider will be up, running and operating the services from early April. We have got contingency arrangements in place that we've agreed with the Trust should there be any delays linked to 2P transfers, pensions arrangements or asset occupation. But we've got no reason to believe at the minute that there's likely to be any challenges during that period. So I would say 1st of April, but with contingency arrangements in place to take us through to June, should we need to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Then can I go to Joe's got a hand up next, I think.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for presenting the report, Dave and Fiona. It was good to see in the report that there was explicit questions and the tendering process on the workforce. So how can we sustain our interest in staff development and staff wellbeing when we're thinking of contract monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely right. It was a critical area for us in our quality assessment during the tender. That's partly for us to be able to assess and understand how the provider is going or intends to deliver those services, but it goes beyond that because their contract submission, their tender submission rather, is what forms a part of their contract with us then as a council. So what they've committed to do within their submission will form the basis of our contractual offer to them as a provider. We will be having regular performance meetings with them as part of that commissioning cycle to make sure that they're performing against all key elements of the contract. And that focus around staff training, the continual agreement to work in social partnership, all of those elements will form part of those monthly or quarterly, depending on what topic it is, monitoring arrangements. So they will be critical. It will be forming part of that commissioning cycle. And of course, that's what we'll use then to inform members as to the progress and the quality of the provider going forward.
Thanks, Mandy.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Can we look at the SLA agreements as well, Dave, and put some investment into the Fairwater site, which I know is very much needed?
Yeah, this is one that we'll pick up as a matter of urgency with the provider when we meet with them. The Fairwater site is dual use, as you'll know. It's jointly operated by the school and by the provider at the minute. There has always been an SLA in place historically between those two organisations, and I see no reason why that wouldn't be an expectation going forward. That will put it on a firm footing then in terms of whose responsibility different elements are. What I can say is, as I say, the provider has given us quite a clear indication that their intentions are with a 10-year contract to invest. I would hope to see clarity in the first few months on what that investment programme looks like, and then we can start picking up whether there's any opportunities for specific investment at specific sites.
Thanks, Mandy. Dave, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm quite pleased with the process it's gone through, actually, and I'm quite reassured by the how discerning we've been around the providers that have come forward. That bar is as high as it is. It's quite reassuring to me that quality is the compromise is non-existent. I'm glad that the ultimate provider is of a good quality, and I have done a little bit of research myself, looking on Facebook, for example, their website around them as providers. They do seem to be genuinely good providers, certainly from the comments I've seen from service users in the local authorities where they operate, and their website seems to have really good values at its core, which is very important to us, certainly as a council. In the report, you've got a list of risks. One of the risks that I think is missing is around what if we don't agree today? And a question that has been asked elsewhere is also the prospect of taking it in-house. I know that's addressed in Appendix 1, but if in theory we were to say, look, we're not happy and we wanted to not approve this report, what would happen if we did that, and what happens if we decided to opt for an in-house provision?
Yeah, you're right. So one of the approaches that we're taking increasingly now when we're looking at contracts, and in fact when we're looking at service provision in general to put before members, is a proper commissioning approach. So we're looking at all of the options for the delivery of a service, whether that's insourcing, whether it's procurement of a provider, whether it's extensions to contracts, whatever that may be. So that's the process that we've gone through in our considerations with this report. The conclusions as to why we've ruled out recommending insourcing this are based on Appendix 1, and it's down to two elements, really, two critical elements that I know form part of the initial council report. One is cost. There is a considerably higher cost for offering the service in-house. Part of that is linked to the elements that Councillor Cross mentioned at the start around rates relief, charitable relief, ability to apply for grants, but also the way that we operate within commercial markets may not be as swift and as fleet as for as other organisations as well. And the second is around skill sets. So whilst we're looking here at TUPE transfer arrangements to the new provider from TLT, that doesn't take into account any more senior management skill sets that are needed to really inject that expertise into the provider, into that sector. That's something that a pre-existing provider can do in a much better way than a local authority would be able to do. So there are strong strategic and financial considerations as to why we're not recommending insourcing, but just to reassure you, that is certainly something that we've considered as part of the process. Remind me of the second part of the question.
It was if we decided not to vote in favour of it at all, so whether there would be continuation of Torvine Leisure Trust and how that would work.
Yeah, so the notification has been issued to Torvine Leisure Trust that their contract would essentially cease with us by the contingency arrangements that we have in place. Members will be aware of the challenges financially for Torvine Leisure Trust. On the basis that we've now tendered, we couldn't award a contract for Torvine Leisure Trust, essentially, because they weren't the successful tenderer under this contract. So on the basis we've terminated the existing contract, the options would be between bringing that service in-house, and for the reasons that I've set out, I think that would be challenging, or proceeding with the provider that's mentioned in the report.
So just so I'm clear on it, so what you're saying is that, so to take it in-house would mean that we would have to adjust our budget accordingly to be able to accommodate that. So on top of the sort of savings we've had to make this year, we'd have to find further so we'd have to adjust. And we wouldn't necessarily be as dynamic as Halo would be positioned to be in terms of delivery for residents, because the honest answer is instinctively I veer towards the in-house model for many things, but the pragmatist in me is hearing that it wouldn't be as dynamic in delivering for residents and for those current users, and we would have to find savings elsewhere. So I've got that's understood, yeah.
That's exactly right. That analysis is spot on, and the savings are quite considerable that members would need to find to be able to do that. As we set out in the report to council, there's a significant in-year pressure that wouldn't suddenly disappear if we were to look to bring that service in, over and above all the pressures I've set out that would put us at a competitive disadvantage for financing if we're in that market as well. So you're looking at a sizable amount there that would need to be found.
So we're effectively in the space of having to put that sort of ideological point aside for the best of, service users, council budgets, and the workforce as well in the short term. The issue of scale that you mentioned, of course, also wouldn't be resolved by that in-housing. I had a few sort of questions and points I wanted to note.
Joe still got a question.
Joe, did you want to come back then before I go?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just a quick question on any future profits. So how will any future profits be managed or reinvested in Torvine?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about the quality elements of the tender. There was also a price component to the tender. Now, on the basis that we're issuing a fixed price, if you like, we needed to find another mechanism for assessing price, and that's based on profit share. The exact figures I won't talk about. I don't know if there's a degree of commercial confidentiality within the tender's bid on that, but it's a significant proportion. I can certainly say over 75% of profits would be essentially returned for spend. So the breakdown of the costs for the provider are day-to-day operating costs, with the majority then, 75% plus of profit, actually coming back to Torvine specifically. That's not to say they wouldn't reinvest the other 25% within Torvine as well. We expect that they'll use some of that for investment in capital and their development programme. But the contract ties them in to reinvestment of that other element of profit in Torvine.
Sue, did you want to come in then?
Yeah, just a quick point of clarification, if I may, Leader. The expectation, you said, is that the provider would wish to join the council's pension scheme, but that's not a requirement, is that right, of the offer?
The contract sets a requirement that we don't develop a two-tier workforce so that it's compliant with the two-tier workforce code of practice that's coming into being. That the contract set out multiple options for the provider to do, all of which would ensure, in line with the regulations, that the provider was offering an equivalent pension scheme if it wasn't the LGPS. What we fully expect is that if members approve today the recommendation, the LGPS becomes the simplest and best value pension option for the provider. So I'd see no reason why they wouldn't bite a hand off, essentially, to take those terms there. That's not undermining any commercial negotiation. The risks to the council are very, very low in relation to that. But come what may, even if there was an issue with that, the bottom line is they're obliged to meet that two-tier workforce code of practice.
Thank you.
Okay. I really welcome 3.5 in the report, the fact that, you know, this is 70% quality, 10% social value, and isn't just a lowest price tendering exercise. I think that's very important, and I welcome the reassurance you've given about the community-focused and community-minded approach there. Moving to section 4 of the report, just noting the point at 4.4.1, about the transfer arrangements. Is there anything that we can do to help with the communication of that, to give the workforce some reassurance? Obviously working with both Torvine Leisure Trust and the new provider. I know our HR colleagues have been in contact with staff and have reassured the trade unions as well. So anything we can do to help that sort of transfer be as smooth as possible, I think would be welcomed. And also welcome the specific points at 4.4.2 that have been actually written into the report about the commitment to be a workforce-friendly provider who will work with us and maintain, I think, that social partnership with trade unions that we find very welcome. So, yeah, I guess my question is, can we get communications out to reassure the staff in the short term about that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we'll work on at multiple levels. So a few things. We've allocated HR time within the programme to be able to support TLT with that 2P transfer arrangement. I'm mindful that TLT have already started to communicate with their staff. They've approved comms with us around engaging with their staff and trying to provide some reassurance to their staff as well with that. Certainly something we'll now look at is how we can support further with that messaging. And I do think it's important that certainly from myself as an officer, I'll put something in writing to the board of TLT to express what we've discussed today.
And I guess we can use that also to express our thanks to them for the way they've approached it in a professional way, and our thanks to them for the work they've done in recent times to, you know, deal with a very difficult situation. This isn't a reflection on them, this is just us trying to get the best deal for the future for leisure service and the people that use them in the borough. Okay, any further questions then before we move to the recommendations? The recommendations are at paragraph 9 of the report at 9.1.2. It's recommended that Cabinet award the 10-year contract with the potential to extend for a further 5 years for leisure services, as set out in the report, to Halo Leisure Services, subject to the conclusion of the standstill period. And secondly, it's recommended that the Cabinet supports the admission of Halo Leisure Services to the Greater Gwent Pension Fund as an admitted body via a pass-through agreement with the Council, providing the necessary indemnities as required by the pass-through agreement to the fund. This will enable all eligible TLT staff who transfer to the new provider to retain membership of the LGPS, and for eligible new joiners to join the LGPS under the two-tier workforce code of practice, noting the implications for the underwriting set out in sections 4.4.2 and 7.2 as well. So are we happy to agree those recommendations? Show of hands. That's carried. Thank you very much for your hard work on this to Dave and his officers, and also to echo that thanks to everyone involved for the way they've handled this.